Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Delighted to have you here after 4 o'clock and on Halloween. I just want you to know that. So it's very important that we do this right, and then we can all go out and get some candy. Anyway, welcome to the final session, I guess, of the day. Resilience, reliability, and sustainability, the role of ESG in human-centered automation in supply chains. My name is Rich Rothman. I'm the moderator today, and delighted to be here and talk to you about this. So we have a great panel for you. Jonathan Daniels is here, CEO of Port Everglades Authority. And we also have Tom Bianculli, who's the CTO of Zebra Technologies, and we're going to understand the significance of that going forward. Matthew Bradley's here, and Matthew's the Senior Vice President for Risk Solutions of the Americas at Crisis24. And we can all understand it's really important to talk about. And Bernard Spitz is here, delighted and honored to be sitting with the President International of Europe for MEDEF. And we're very excited to have Bernard here so we can talk. So gentlemen, welcome to the panel.
Good to be here.
We're delighted to have you. So let's just talk for a minute about, what we're talking about with supply chains. It seems like, let's analyze the group. There are people who are the consumers. There are people who are, performing to bring product to the consumers. And from my point of view, as the publisher of Global Miami and Latin Trade and Latin CEO and Miami Business, all this other stuff, and my radio show, the whole thing has changed. The whole landscape, from my point of view, has changed. It's changed on two different levels. The expectations for the customer, that customer is different than it was 20 years ago because the customer has become a shipper. Everyone thinks they're a shipper. How many, when you order, when you order something from Amazon or wherever, anywhere in the world, it doesn't make any difference. You can sit here in Coral Gables and order, and you start tracking it, aren't you? Well, all of a sudden, you're Jonathan at a port. You want to know where that ship is. Or you're Ralph at the airport, and you want to know where that plane is, and what the problem is, or if it's going to come on time. That's a whole different expectation than what it was 20, 25 years ago. Now, on the other hand, because of that, because the customers change, the expectations have changed, when the shipper has changed. And the shipper has to be conscious of what's going on to meet the customer's needs. And the customer's needs are almost changing on a dime today because things are changing on a dime because of, communication. And the ability to have software, the ability to communicate, the ability to understand, and the ability to have, be part of the process. You're no longer just receiving something, but you're part of the process. You make a decision. Do you want to get it today? Well, that's a different story than it was a few years ago. Do you want to get it by 8 o'clock tonight? Sure, you can do that. Do you want to get it in 2 days? You want to get it in 4 days? You want to save money and wait, you can get it in 7 to 10 days. Everything has changed. Nothing's the same. And to say that, interestingly, with supply chains, the common person, those on the street, are now, the buzzwords are supply chain and so forth, and the average person knows what we're talking about because everyone's saying, well, why don't you have stuff on the shelves? Well, supply chain. It's a supply chain. There's no question about it. Why don't I have paper when I'm printing my magazine? And I use thousands of pounds worth of papers for 2 different magazines right now. Why? Because supply chain. That's the answer. So my expectations for the money I spend to print my magazines, are you still there? Yeah. Money that I print my magazines, and your expectations in dealing with the populace and in dealing with the population of those who are actually doing the shipping, man, it's on time, and you've got to be exact in what you're talking about. So, having said that, how have we looked at supply chain differently than we have over, let's say, just the last 10 years? Because this year alone is a paradigm shift. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. Great introduction too, and we're all experiencing that every day. One of the things I would say is just being able to predict better. That's really what we're hearing from a lot of our customers. Is the old way of doing things, what's got them here is not going to get them there. So looking at week 38 of last year, if you're a retailer and you're trying to make sure that shelf's not empty, like you mentioned earlier, and saying, hey, I'm going to predict what I should have on the shelf based on week 38 last year and makes maybe some adjustments, that's not cutting it. So using social, news, events, weather, all kinds of dynamic data feeds, and also having that information about where, whether it's over the sea, it's in the air, it's over the road, being able to see the network literally in real time, instrument that network and be able to see it in real time, and then sense and respond. That's one of the biggest, being very dynamic, and having all that data at your fingertips to be able to understand what should you adjust moment by moment. And one of the things I just mentioned in there is the notion, you kind of touched on it, around we all want to know what's happening, right? From a conversational commerce perspective, that's a term now that's kind of really emerged in a major way. It's spoken about for a number of years, but now it's an imperative. Like if you're going to deliver to somebody and deliver to their expectations, if you miss those expectations, there's a reasonable amount of willingness for that if you keep me informed, right? Let me know, where is my shipment, how is it moving, what's happening, and keep me as part of that conversation.
Well, and I think that's correct. I mean, how many of us have actually made a phone call to speak to one of our suppliers? I'll just pick AT&T, for example, and I hope no one's from AT&T. But you speak to these people, they're sitting God knows where. You have no idea where they're sitting. It could be anywhere in the world, they're sitting there talking to you. And you think, oh my God, this is going to be a ridiculous conversation to have. Such as, I just had that today from my stepdaughter, where's her I-14, which apparently is somewhere in the world right now. You can't get an I-14 right now if you're buying it on AT&T. It's just not going to happen. They're going to say, well, let me see. And here, I think it's going to be sometime by Christmas. It's really changed. It's an expectation. But because they've changed and they're very conscious of what you're saying, this is frontline experience. This affects how you have supply, because you sell more, you get more. They're excited. They bring more to you. If you have an incredibly remarkable experience, that's an expectation, and that blows them away. Yeah. Completely changes the relationship that you have with that company. Last comment on that.
Yeah, sure. And just from an expectation perspective, those expectations are becoming liquid expectations, right? Where you have an expectation in one part of your life, and then you expect that to kind of bleed over to another. And just really quickly, one of the largest public carriers in the country, and transportation carriers, and we're talking with their CIO, and he said, hey, you know what I'm really worried about from a competitive perspective, and I'm figuring it's going to be another carrier. And he says Starbucks. And I said, I missed the mark, So I looked at it with kind of a blank stare. And his reason was the expectation you have at Starbucks, you order online, you kind of remove all of the unpleasant parts of the experience, right? The payment's happening on your device, you're not waiting online to pay. You just swoop in and pick up the beverage when you walk into that Starbucks. And the expectation that's now set with that consumer is expected from a carrier, from a transportation perspective. Why can't you deliver to my trunk? Why can't you know where I am? How do you make it as seamless and easy as possible, like that Starbucks experience, when I'm dealing with getting that iPhone 14, to a family member, right? And that's just not there yet, but the experience is being set there.
Jonathan, let me ask you this. You deal in one of the things that people have learned really well over the last year with the certainly with the number of ships that have been overseas, the number of ships that are sitting outside of Long Beach and the port of Los Angeles, the number of ships that are in the South China Sea, you could walk across the Pacific with a number of ships that are, your life has got to have changed because people want to know. That's what it really comes down to. People want to know, how are they part of the process? How does this process become efficient? Why can't I get my product? Why can't you make it more efficient? How do you deal with that?
Well, when you take a look at the way the congestion was in Southern California, it was the best thing that happened to us and the worst thing that happened to us as far as ports are concerned. Now, ports were blamed for the backlog. Ports were just a part of the overall failure of the logistics chain. And it is going to happen. Congestion is here. Congestion is going to be here. How we deal with it from the infrastructure portion of it. And when I would call my friend Mario Cordero out at the Port of Long Beach, he'd see me on the line and he'd answer the phone, not by saying, hello, what's going on? He'd be like, 112. I'm like, over time, we knew that 112 vessels were off of San Pedro Bay, anchored and waiting to come in. But it was a multidisciplinary issue, because when you took care of the congestion on the port, then there would be an issue on the rail. Then there would be an issue on the roadways. It was a system where the hurdles just kept on getting pushed out, eventually to the point where, and it was a perfect storm. What happened? You had pent-up demand. You finally had production that was back online in Asia that was coming back in. And then something that happens every single year, the holiday season. So now you're trying to bring everything in to meet the pent-up demand associated with e-commerce. You have the holiday season. Well, guess what? The holiday season is back again. And what do we have? We have congestion. But for us working with the federal government, and it allowed us the opportunity to go to them and say, finally, what we need is an integrated transportation program, we need to understand what it is like to deal from port to rail to road to air as well, because it's a part of what we do day in and day out. And we are dealing with a society, even in the ports, when cargo tends to stop. And that's the worst thing it can do, but it tends to stop there or move very slowly. But immediately, if we go on Amazon or if we go on and order anything else, within about 30 seconds, I'm immediately looking at the email, what is my tracking number? And then I know they barely even have the order yet. And what am I doing? I want to know when it's been filled at the fulfillment center, when it gets picked up by FedEx or by UPS or some other. I want to know it immediately. That's the society that we're living in right now. And unfortunately, it's the same thing that's occurring at the ports. I want to know when my ship is arriving, what's the SKU number, when that container is on the ground, when that container leaves and goes to some type of distribution facility, and ultimately when it ends up in someone else's hands. So again, the best in that it brought focus to a broken logistics chain. And the worst of times, because it's not over yet. We're still years away from making the changes necessary in infrastructure, more drivers, workforce development, rail as well, having the equipment necessary to fulfill those orders, take the congestion away.
Well, that's exactly correct. I mean, we're very blessed. I mean, those who are sitting here and you're from South Florida, for example, your port and, you know, the Port Miami, your airport, and I mean, we're all in Miami Customs District, so our numbers are there. The interesting thing is that we happen to be, and this is going to get over to our good friend Matthew, we happen to be in an environment that is very pro-technology at the ports and at the airports. You know, I've hosted so many people from the CBP on my show, locally and nationally. We have a remarkable, you know, we have an environment that when the new technology comes out, it's at MIA. You know, Ralph is doing it. And they're making it happen. They're making it happen for a lot of reasons, and this is going to get me right into risk management. We live in a very strange world. In the risk that exists, everyone here has had some fraud at some point. You're all paranoid. Don't tell me you're not. I know you are. And the risks are unbelievable, and they're multiple to an infinity when you're dealing on a global basis. Can you comprehend 112 ships? That's a lot of ships. I mean, go to the ports right now and see what
that was one of their better days.
And that was a better day, right? And so it just gets worse. But the point is this, and let me ask you this, Matthew, that risk, the fraud, the inability to get product from A to B in a safe way affects supply chain, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does, Rich. And I think you said it at the beginning, right? The answer to every question is supply chain, whether it's good or whether it's bad. Yeah. And so what's happened in the last few years is not just that people like Rich or Tom and Jonathan, who are experts in supply chain, but we've all become armchair supply chain managers, right? As we've talked about, the technology says it used to be a black box. And today it's like, no, I can know when the order, starts and when it ends and when it's when it's coming down my street to show up. And so you look at that and say, well, is that a good or a bad thing? But I think that when you talk about risk and shining a light on supply chain, right? So now we've opened up the black box. We've exposed what the supply chain is. People understand it. And now we say, okay, make it better. And I heard about some of these things last week as we were discussing with Tom and Jonathan before about how the improvements in supply chain, right? How the port becomes more efficient through new cranes, how it becomes better with solar power. And so those are the things that I think are making us more sustainable. We're more concerned about the environment within the ports. And so what happens is it becomes more efficient to supply goods. And that's never a bad thing, right? So that demand was, a couple years ago, I order something, somehow 2 days later it shows up. When it stopped showing up 2 days later, I said, hey, what's happening? But now it's back to where it was, except now I have a better understanding. So I view those opportunities of risk and say, let's explain how it works, make it better and more productive.
I want to bring Bernard into this discussion for a second. And, when you speak fairly often, you speak of the social contract. You speak of the population. you speak of a part of the population that doesn't seem to share in what the rest of the population is able to do. And I think that affects global concepts and movement of products and risk analysis in sort of fairness. I mean, one of the things that I was intrigued with, and I watched some of your videos, the ones in French were hard for me. I have to tell you that, since I took Spanish for 7 years. But I tried. I mean, I try to read lips, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work for me. But I think one of the things that you said in one of your discussions on you can find on YouTube is liberty, equality, and fraternity. Remarkable words. And when you think of ESG and you think of the social compact that we have in the world, that we are trying to develop, we're trying to bring some form of democratization to the rest of the world, so they can be, if you think about it, we take it for granted, democracy, we're going to go out and do what we want to do, to a degree, unless you believe in the matrix, which you might. But in reality, a lot of folks can't. And I think that impedes, A, the ability to get new markets, B, the ability to serve those markets, and C, the ability to understand those who are in those markets and what they need. So you can fill needs, you can bring product, you can bring concepts, you can bring governmental concepts. You know, one of the things I learned being in Latin America for 29 years, Manny, about 29 years, in and out with Latin trade and Latin CEOs, that trade liberates. That's one of the things I learned with the privatizations of the 90s. It was prolific. Latin America was enormous. We were developing the concept of a middle class that didn't exist. Now, what did that mean? It brought about something that goes right back to what you said earlier: liberty, fraternity, and equality. How did you feel when you think about that? Is that true?
Well, you address the issue at stratospheric level. We were talking about logistics, and now we are talking about democracy and the future of mankind. Okay. As you said at the beginning, we are in a transition, in a pure transition. There is a big shift, and nobody knows exactly what will be the new balance, how the new balance is going to work. So the Chinese would say it's an interesting time. There will be losers and winners. And the question, when you speak about risk management, you know, I have spent 12 years as a chairman of the insurance business in France and the head of the lobby at Brussels so when we are talking about insurance, we are talking about risk management, of course. And it is clear that in a transition time, we have to be prepared to a lot of risks and to address them. We cannot, as somebody said today, CEOs are not there to predict the future. They are there to make things in a way to be ready to fix the situation, whatever it is. And we have had a lot of disruptions recently. Of course, COVID destroyed the regular supply chain. We have the Ukrainian war, of course. May I remember that we had Brexit in Europe. And Brexit exactly is at a shorter stage, a breakup in the supply chain. Because if you see what we had at the channel, the line of trucks, a lot of businesses that are now incapable to work because the cold chain is too long, so it doesn't work, etc., etc. So, and as you said, we have found solutions. At the beginning, it was a total mess. And 1 year later, well, we have found solutions, as we have found solutions for COVID. You know, we can say on the one hand that globalization is under attack, but on the other hand, the vaccine anti-COVID is a win thanks to globalization. Everything is not black and white. Things are always in a gray area. For instance, we are lacking of, because of the situation, the automotive industry is short in terms of semiconductors, microprocessors. So what happened? They have chosen to produce the most expensive cars and to reserve these chips for that. And the consequence is they are making the best margins ever. That's one thing. I am also a board member of Air France. And this morning we had Bombardier CEO. And everybody told you 2 years ago, even last year, that we were entering a new area in which there will be less traffic on the planes, because our children do not want to travel on planes because it's bad, because people didn't want to travel because they didn't want to be exposed to the risk of pandemics and so on. The result is that we have the strongest movement these months, and even without China. So when the Asia will come back, I can guarantee that the traffic will be superior to what it was before COVID. So the lesson of that is it's hard to the future is hard to predict. But what I think it has shown is a need for a better anticipation, a better understanding of the risk, and a better anticipation. I don't want to be too long, but if we have the opportunity later, I would like to talk to you about one big risk that it is not sufficiently prepared, which is regulation.
And the unintended consequences of things that occur, such as Brexit. And that was, there were challenges to the way of life that people had experienced. Most simply speaking, that you could go from one country to another without having to get a visa or so forth. I mean, I could travel on the Channel train from, downtown London to Gare Nord Station, forgive my French, and I just get off the train and I do my thing. And it was wonderful, and I could do that. But I want to get back to another level of discussion. I want to get back to this concept in just a few minutes. One of the things that we've read about and we've listened to when it comes to ESG is the understanding of the employee, the person who works for you, the person who's on the front line, as you point out very, very nicely. And I've owned a bunch of companies. And so why is it so, I mean, this is rhetorical, obviously. Why is it so important that when we're discussing supply chain, when we're discussing the movement of product, which includes across the counter, to give it to somebody else, as in the coffee shop discussion. Why is that so important? And then I want to bring it back to something from 1948. Tom.
Yeah, well, I mean, we like to think of it as, and our customers talk to us about it this way, which is that's where the work's being done, right? I mean, whether it's the package being delivered, it's the truck being loaded, it's we were talking about in preparation for this. Looking at the, you had mentioned earlier, Jonathan, 53-foot, trailers rolling down the road. Typically, 30% of those trailers are air, right? And so the load efficiency isn't where it needs to be, which has got more vehicles moving down the road. That also creates, challenges in terms of the movement and the latency of capital equipment that's deployed around the network. So that frontline worker being able to make their job, use the technology so they can do ultimately what they're passionate about, right? Move everything else out of the way and enable them to basically orchestrate the next best action in that workflow to get the job done. So we're seeing things like gamification of vehicle loading. So think about Tetris meets the 53-foot trailer, meets the parcels that are going into that trailer. We're seeing collaborative robots be deployed in the warehouse. So we acquired a company in the Valley called Fetch Robotics about a year ago, and these are autonomous mobile robots that can completely autonomously navigate a warehouse. But what we're doing is, instead of that warehouse worker that's doing that e-com picking, that frontline worker walking 15 miles a day and being paid to walk, which isn't a particularly exciting thing to be doing as part of your job, they can take a lot more pride and ownership in their work because they're working collaboratively with a robot that's doing the walking, and then they're attending to other elements of the job, like the actual picking and making sure the order is prepared, packaged, and shipped properly, right? So really getting those workers engaged, helping them to be as efficient as possible, and it's the duality of that the organization that's employing those individuals is being more effective and optimized, and those individuals have better pride of their work, ownership of their work, and are more fulfilled, which, back to maybe some of Bernard's thoughts, the labor shortage and wage inflation is now even putting more emphasis on that. So if you're going to retain your workers, you've got to provide that experience. Retailer we met with last week said their number one driver behind retention was the deployment of technology to make the job easy for those frontline workers.
Exactly, and I'm glad that's my segue. Thank you for that, Tom. We didn't even prep that. Two people I want to get to, and I want to get back to Bernard but let me go to Jonathan first, and then I want to get back to Matthew. Let's talk about technology, as it affects risk. When I interview the guys at the CBP, constantly, we're talking about, they can't miss. they work with you. They can't miss, Jonathan. They can't miss. I know you know this, given your background. They have to get it right every time. And they can't get it right without the technology being ahead of the bad guys. You got to be ahead of the bad guys. I mean, you just got to get it right that way. So from your point of view, and I want to discuss this also. First, Jonathan, you must be doing, and some you can't talk about, I'm sure. But later we can discuss it.
We'll talk about
later.
that
Off
camera.
But you must be doing something to mitigate that situation, because I know your port's thriving.
Sure it is, and you know, when you take a look at inbound containers, and you're right, you can't miss. If you miss one, there is the opportunity for something very catastrophic to happen. You know, CBP takes a look at it, the Department of Homeland Security takes a look at it as a certain amount of inspections. Well, I'm here to tell you that on an inbound container, every single container that lands at the port ends up going through radiation portal monitors. All right, to a certain extent, that risk is mitigated to a certain level because everyone is evaluated. Now, on top of that, not everyone is an intensive inspection. And there's that fine line between utilization of technology for an intensive inspection and opening it up and actually evaluating everything from pests or anything else coming in. So there's a certain associated risk with that. But you talk about the utilization of technology, and it really starts at the moment that that vessel ties up. If you happen to be sitting in the cab of a crane right now, you are probably sitting in the most advanced gaming console you have ever seen. It's changed workforce development. It's changed the way in which they are trained. They've gone away from being just purely a crane operator to a computer programmer to the highest level. And what that does ultimately, it removes the risk associated with damage. It removes the risk associated with injury. And unfortunately, there was a failure in that not too long ago. And when anything happens on a port site, typically it is fatal or it is extremely devastating. What we deal with is big. It's heavy. You don't get the opportunity to put your hand up there and stop a 25-ton container filled with marble. So what you're trying to do is utilize technology, utilize various characteristics of available technology in order to allow us the opportunity to minimize risk. Now, it's never so important as dealing with the congestion right now. And the deployment of technology, from automated and appointment systems to the utilization of CCTV technology and everything else that goes along with it. It's a combination of passive and active technology in order to make sure that that cargo is moving as efficiently as is possible. And oftentimes we get caught with the Longshoremen's Union about the utilization of new technology to minimize the amount of workers that are on site. I will tell you at Port Everglades that that technology is deployed to make humans more efficient, to put them in a safer situation, to allow us the opportunity to better handle, to be able to move cargo from one point to another, as I mentioned before, where typically at a port, cargo almost comes to rest. And that's the one time when a vessel is actually losing money, when it's tied up to dock. So the deployment of new technology, utilizing the technology in an efficient way, because technology oftentimes is a buzzword, but how do we deploy it in a way to minimize congestion, move cargo from one mode to the next as expeditiously as possible?
Well said. Matthew, you're a leader in risk management analysis, which is so important. The technology that you know about, some of which is secretive, but is crucial for everyone to get their products right now. And where do you stand? What are you doing? How far advanced do you work to facilitate that? And how does it really help the frontline people that we're talking about in getting their job done? A, getting it done correctly, and B, feeling good about their job, and C, going home safe at night.
Yeah, Rich, that's a great question. And I really appreciate the way we're going with this discussion around the leveraging of technology to make the human more efficient. So at Crisis24, we have the largest group of intelligence analysts, right? More than 150 analysts. And their job is to provide intelligence about what's happening outside of the warehouse, outside of the port, right? So when the trucks roll, you don't know what's in front of them, right? You know where the truck is, but you don't know what's in front of them and what might be able to impact that delivery. Once you're inside the warehouse, you don't know what's impacting that ship out on the sea or potentially on the way to the warehouse. And so I think we use automation through AI and machine learning, because what the analyst does best is analyze. What the machine does best is bring information to the analyst so they can analyze it, right? Our analysts used to spend a lot of time just combing through reams of information trying to say, is this important? We fed all of our old alerts into the machine, and now the machine knows exactly what to look for. So it can scan millions, so it does an even better job than what the humans did. So you're allowing the humans to specialize in what they're best at by using machines to take away this routine work, right? You don't want humans lifting containers. You don't want humans moving giant packages through the warehouse, because that's not what they're specialized for. And so we're using technology on the intelligence side to work through the whole ecosystem, right? So these guys are experts in what happens at the port, what happens in the warehouse or in the manufacturing plant, and then we're helping protect the rest of the ecosystem by providing intelligence about the third-party risks that they don't have to worry about.
Did you want to comment? You look like you wanted to comment.
It's interesting because you talk about that, and oftentimes technology, we get called constantly about, here's the latest technology, it's going to make you more efficient, it's going to move congestion and such like that. What I like about the technology that you're talking about, and that we're seeing more and more on the ports, it allows humans to use a better level of intuition, because you can't remove the human from every aspect of it. What we do, it's very much imperfect. So you're giving them the information, you're giving them the technology to help them make better decisions, to be safer, to be more efficient. And ultimately, that's what we're looking for. We're looking at making the human and their interactions with what goes on the port better. There has to be, we can't remove humans. We can't remove the intuition that's necessary. And that's really the point that really fine tunes the work that's done, certainly on a port site. So thank you.
So that gets us to, this is exactly where I wanted us to go, and it was serendipitous.
Sorry,
that was great.
You didn't.
Yeah, that's exactly where I wanted us to go. I was hoping. And that is this. One of the things, and this is going to be right to Bernard, one of the things that has influenced my point of view in dealing with people in business, and I'm listening to what you're saying, we got to make the frontline worker better. We have to support them. We have to make them feel comfortable in what they're doing, and in your case, safe, because I saw a lethal weapon at the end. It wasn't good when the thing came down at the guy at the end. So I'm thinking about, all right, so what does that mean to me as an owner? And I've had anywhere from 26 to 135 employees at a given time. So I think of Maslow's hierarchies, the theory of hierarchies. And that is the triangle, and you have all the different things on the bottom, the different little areas you have to fill in, and that's their security. That's their basic. If you make the employee comfortable not having to worry about the basics such as rent, mortgage, food, security, family, if you get all those blocks filled out, that person then feels better, according to Maslow when he was at University of Chicago, and they can then go to the next level. And you keep going to the next level and the next level and finally get to the top, and that's self-actualization. And you go, I'm complete. Not everyone gets there, but they try. But what you're saying is that if we bring in the consciousness of the employee and commit to making them feel good about themselves, good about their job, safe about their job, and great about their family, they will produce and function better because they feel good about everything. In a sense, they're being taken care of, but they're earning what they're getting. Everyone wins on that. Bernard, is that part of the ability to really move forward with a different perspective on supply chain and putting the human element into that as well as the technology, and the technology becomes a tool to make the human better?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, and it's much more. It goes beyond supply chain. It's a matter of the organization of the world. We know that the market is not working correctly, and we have seen that the crisis, the war, everything shed light on the fragilities of our system, because it's not enough inclusive, and we know that. If you look at, if you read the statements at Davos or whatever, it's not only the unions who say that. I mean, a lot of CEOs say that, and they know that one of the risks is the social risk, because at a certain moment of a backlash from the people, a claim for from populism, something that we see in many countries, in Europe and elsewhere, and even sometimes a claim for what's the word? Authoritarian democracy, which is a strange combination. So what would be the answer? We are in a global world, so there is no, of course, national answers. We have things to do on our own countries. For instance, you were talking about the frontliners. We have not enough nurses in France. We lack nurses. Why? Because they are not paid enough. It's a tough job, and the hierarchy of revenue, it doesn't fit at all with the hierarchy of importance. Nobody cares of a CEO. Nobody cares of each of us, but we care about nurses. We care about teachers, and they are not paid enough. A teacher cannot live in London today. It's just impossible, even a teacher of university. And a nurse cannot afford to live in Paris center. So they are far away, and when they have to do, they have more transportation. The transportation is expensive, it's long, it's tiring. I mean, all the system is going to a stalemate. So we have to face that at our local level, but we have also to address the issue globally. And that here is the problem, because we don't expect the UN to answer that, of course not. And when we have these meetings of the G7, G20, that there could be something. We have made a proposal with the French Employers Association in agreement with the 6 other big employers association, including the US Chamber, to promote some kind of a new Bretton Woods, meaning a conference in which where we would be addressed the issues, the social contract, as you said, I mean, the responsibility, and and we could find solutions, because what happened in Bretton Woods was answers to what had triggered off the crisis. I mean, from an economic point of view, everything built today is coming from that conference. OECD, IMF, WTO, World Bank, etc. But it was between the countries who had won the World War, and it was on issues that had nothing to be seen with the issues today. Now, if you want to address that, you have to invite the emerging country. Well, what was the emerging country would have emerged now? I mean, the big powers. You have to invite the international organizations, and you have to find new rules of the game. And some rules are very easy to find. It's not to create a new thing. It's to be inclusive. When the World Bank finances a project, today nobody cares if there is or not an inclusive part of it, meaning 20% of the budget dedicated to schools or hospitals or whatever. It's not in the rules of the game. If they were on the rules of the game, nobody would control it. And even if it was controlled, there would be no sanction. So it doesn't exist. It would be very easy to set up a system which would create some kind of rules about that and make the world system working on this basis. It's not that complicated. And if it's just a matter of leadership, and so there is an agreement between the 7 biggest employers association, French, Japanese, UK, Germany, Italy, and Canada, and US Chamber. And we have signed a document with all the unions of these countries. And now we ask for some kind of leadership. President Macron has endorsed it in France, the German Chancellor too. So we are expecting something. So just to say that if there is a one, there is a way. And the last thing about science and progress, it is fascinating to see that we are now, there is a large part of the population who do not believe any longer in progress. They are frightened by it. They refuse it. Not only the old generation, because they are frightened by the new technology things, but you see, look at nuclear, for instance. It's interesting. France and the United States have nuclear plants and work on having more. And it's a good answer for decarbonization of the economy and independence on energy. And some countries are refusing it. I mean, of course, they have their choice, but for pure ideology. Like Germany, where the Greens are powerful. And, well, that's funny, because Germans are used to buy energy from France made by nuclear. So if nuclear is evil, why do they buy energy made with nuclear? Is it because it's dangerous? There are nuclear plants on the other line of the frontier. So I gave recently to my German friends this confidential information, which is that if there is a problem on the French side of the frontier, it's not better if it was it's not worse than if it would be on the German side of the frontier. And things are going to change because, well, necessity creates a little bit of reason. So they are continuing to explore to exploit 3 plants. But the fascinating thing is, all these things have been started because a reaction at Fukushima, sorry, Fukushima. But believe it or not, in Japan, they have 20 plants, nuclear plants, working, and 10 under construction. So they know better than us what is dangerous or not. But this is ideological, and there is this conflict between progress. I think it's we were used to be always going always in the sense of progress, and now we have to face a lot of people who are against it, and I think it's troubling, and this is one of the problems we will have in the future, I guess.
Thank you for that. And we all just got college credit. Everyone here sign up on the way out. You get 2 points college credit towards your MBA. Just want you to be aware of that. I want to segue just for a little bit, and then I'm going to get back to that point. And you made a comment in one of your interviews, and you called it controversial or conversational commerce. Conversational commerce. And it's sort of like we're talking about it. And we're talking even about the AI, which goes to you specifically, because without AI, you're in trouble. And same thing with you. And so, and a good conversational commerce scenario ultimately brings the physical experience, which might be different. All of that, to me, makes it a smarter final user of the product, the one who purchases it. And along the way, it makes the person who is delivering and facilitating and doing the warehousing and running those cranes that are so incredible that the kids would love to run, I'm sure, and probably do a great job. You know, I've watched them. And but let's talk about that for a second. How far out do you look to have this conversation? Because to me, what we're discussing, and all of this is tied in, is an ongoing conversation that's very necessary to bring about a result over there, but we're not there yet. So how far out do you look, and how significant are your conversations?
Yeah, that conversational commerce with the end user, you're saying, with the end consumer, essentially, right? Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually about, ultimately, it's about being able to anticipate what someone is going to need before maybe they even know they need it.
So right? Is that data-driven? Is that data-driven?
That's absolutely data-driven.
So it's all data, which is all part of the conversation that we're having.
But it is, but I think there was a great set of points, string of points here where, actually it's in the title of the panel here, human-centered automation. And when we talk about automation, we're talking about physical automation like the robots I mentioned earlier. We're also talking about digital automation, the digital decisioning that both Matthew and Jonathan were referring to, where there's just a massive number of inputs for somebody to sit down and make sense. You don't want to throw the data away because there's signal in there, but to make sense of it manually is just not a thing. On the other hand, you've got to have that automation work in tandem with somebody that's got the experience, that knows that it's sort of sifting through and is able to kind of give them the insight they need in order to make a better decision. But ultimately, from a conversational commerce perspective, yeah, it's about, I mean, you look at what Amazon's doing, it was probably 6 or 7 years ago, they patented anticipatory shipping. So they're actually looking at, for instance, when you're hovering over an item online, but haven't ordered it yet, and you do that a certain number of times, they'll, in an anticipatory way, ship to a distribution center near you so that they're when you get it the next day, it looks like magic, but the expedited shipping cost isn't really there because they've already got it into a distribution center.
So wait a minute. So if you have your warehousing, and this isn't an Amazon thing, Amazon has established regional warehouses. So that's why if I order something on a Sunday, I swear to God, 10 o'clock that night, it could be at my front desk at my building. It could be there.
Or if you don't order it, but you're digitally drooling on it, as some people like to say, just hovering over it with your mouse, then they're going to move it to that distribution center near you because they can flex that network given the scale they have.
Okay, so I want to get to our good friend over here who's risk management. You're on top of this. I had the head of CPB and a couple of folks were talking to me, and they once said to me, "We know what's coming." I'm paraphrasing. We know what's coming. We know when it's being loaded in the ether out there. We know what's coming. We can anticipate. It's written somewhere, digitized somewhere. You're part of that. You have to be part of that to understand the risk. So how far out are you dealing with this AI to make their jobs better?
Yeah, that's a good point. And then the next step in the evolution of intelligence and using analytics is obviously the predictive analytics. And that's where it is more complicated when it comes to predicting geopolitical events or physical events. We've got very good models for predicting weather, natural disasters, where a wildfire is going to go based on the direction of the wind, other factors like that. But talking about, where, what'll be the next country to have a regional conflict? How long will it last? What'll be the outcome? I mean, if you had looked at, analyst projections about the war in Ukraine as far as, what was most likely versus least likely, this probably wasn't the most likely event, right? That we would have a protracted war. Okay, because most analysts, and we were talking in the discussion this morning with Bernard, why did the United States make the offer to President Zelensky to move him out of Ukraine? Because they didn't think the war was going to last, and they didn't think he was going to win. And he decided to stay and rallied the troops, and now this is where we are, and so now we're into a stalemate. So that predictive analytics is what we're all chasing. And maybe, from a commerce perspective, we have an indicator that says, if somebody hovers over this item in their, viewing for more than 30 seconds, 80% of the time they end up buying it. Therefore, it makes sense, I might as well move it out to the warehouse. But we don't have enough reliable indicators to say that, this event happened in the Ukraine, therefore 6 months from now, China's going to take Taiwan. But that's what everybody wants to know. And so it's more difficult. The models are getting better, but even the best predictive models say, here's what happened over the last 90 days in this country from a stability standpoint or an activity standpoint, and then here's what we predict will happen in the country in the next 7 days, right? So we take 90 days of history, and yet we can only project ahead 7 days. And the models will get better, but it ultimately comes back to that analyst saying, here's what we understand from all of the different signals, and applying that experience, which we'll never do without, right? So analysts, just like, longshoremen won't be replaced by robots, analysts won't be replaced purely by AI. So, good news for all the analysts out there. But it's going to get better, and it must get better as we get more data points about these type of geopolitical events.
It's manifested. It gets better because the bad guys are getting better. You have to know what's going on. Gary Goldfarb, I know you know Gary, and Gary has Interport, great company. And we were discussing how he does inventory. Now, one of the things that we could touch on, and we have 6 minutes left, is, if you move things more efficiently, then your carbon footprint is better than it was. It doesn't malinger. Things go in and out much quicker, more efficiently, and so forth. Gary, I understand doing inventory in doing an audit of inventory because my dad was in retail for 33 years until he retired for about an hour and then went back in business. But it would take days to do inventory, weeks to do inventory for his company. Gary does it in 2 days at Interport. Why? Because he has the technology with, those hovering things, the...
Drones.
Yeah, thanks. Senior moment. Drones. And he scans everything. He scans everything. And they're like 25 feet up, and they're scanning everything, and the guy's there like, okay. doing this, doing his thing. 2 days later, they're done. And then 2 days later, that stuff is out of the warehouse. It's gone. It's history. It's been sold. He's delivering it. And so I find that to be, and we're actually discussing it in Global Miami. It's incredible. And what does that do? Well, good Lord, it frees up, getting back to what we're discussing, the human element, which is really important in all of this. It frees up the human to do something else to make the place more efficient, so they feel better, they're more efficient, and the product moves along, and everyone's happier. And maybe your price comes down because you're able to do it. All right, we only have about 4.5 minutes. Jonathan, at the port, you're doing that. You're being more efficient. You're able to facilitate what you did that to this, and you're able to get the ships turned, because we all know a ship staying there, late leaving, super expensive.
It is, and whether it's real time or just in time, it's time for ports to change. 15, 20 years ago, we were brought kicking and screaming into it. We're notorious, ports are notoriously slow to change. And it's only been in about the last 10 years or so that they've taken new technologies on. And it's been more of the terminal operators, the individual private businesses that are there, that are bringing in new technologies. But when you see a longshoreman that's been at the port for 30 years with a handheld system, so it is downloaded, you get the advanced information, it's downloaded, you know exactly where that container is, you know where it's parked on the dock itself. Then when it gets into the yard, you know it's there. They scan it and immediately, especially because of the type of cargo that we have there on the perishables market, you need to be able to understand exactly where that box is of soft Nicaraguan bananas that are coming. Why? Because that's what Walmart wants. Specifically, you have to understand where that box is. You have to understand how quickly you can pull it out. You also have to understand when it's being put in the yard that you're not going to bury it under 3 or 4 other containers of TVs that are coming from another location. And finally, ports and the marine terminal operators are working together, utilizing the latest technology to make sure that we know whether it's a congestion issue or whether it's knowing where the box is. Ultimately, we're coming together and making the port more efficient, which does make it ultimately more safe. But again, it is real-time delivery of goods. And it's been talked about on a couple of occasions. When I have the opportunity to order something at noon on a Sunday and it's there by 10 o'clock, my gosh, what I have done is I've become the person, I've become that shipper. I've taken the middleman out. In a sense, I've become the freight forwarder.
No, you become the hero.
No. So I'm guaranteeing you will get all the boxes out by 10 o'clock. So if I
all right, listen, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I want Bernard to have the final word today. I want to bring this back to globalization. Globalization brings efficiency. Globalization changes the structure, and it makes us a better person. Final word, Bernard.
I think that we are here again from the starting point, how to manage a transition like the one we are going through. And I think that we have to find a good combination of globalization trade, but make it less frightening for the people, more inclusive. That's on one side. On the other side, we have all understood our weaknesses through the last crisis, and now there is a wish of so-called strategic autonomy, strategic independence, whatever. I mean, we have seen in Europe that we were lacking of stupid small products for chemical from drugs, etc., because they were produced for, I don't know, in small difference in China. And we have all experienced this kind of absurdity. And we have the problem with semiconductors, with Taiwan, and I am not sure that when this will be solved, that Taiwan will be so important for the United States. We have to find, to open our eyes and not making short-term decisions. The choice by Germany to have a cheap gas and putting all their eggs in the Russian basket was a mistake, a typical mistake of short vision. And that's what we have to face all, how to combine short vision with long-term vision. If we don't forget long-term vision, I think that we will find a way.
Gentlemen, I thank you so much. What a great panel. And for those who are here today, thank you so much for staying and listening and being part of this. Now back to you.